So our heart started beating at about 6 weeks, between 5 and 6 weeks in gestation. And our nervous system didn't actually innervate our heart until much later. So our heart can beat without any nervous innervation. We have atria that, atrial cells, I should say, or cells within the atria that can spontaneously contract and send signals to make our entire heart beat. And that's known as the intrinsic conduction system of the heart. Without with the nervous impulses, or I should say, our nervous system does affect the heart. It can help in maintaining a normal heart rate. It can speed up our heart and slow our heart down, but it doesn't cause our heart to contract in general. So the two systems that regulate heart activity, the main one is our intrinsic conduction system, or our nodal system, which we're going to talk about. Our second is the autonomic nervous system, which helps to either slow down or speed up the heart depending on what we're doing. So the intrinsic conduction system sets the heart rhythm. So basically that's what causes our heart to beat roughly 70 to 80 times per minute. If there was no autonomic innervation, then our heart rate would be closer to 100 times per minute. So the conduction system includes a sinoatrial node located in the right atrium. This is called the pacemaker of the heart. Then we have an atrioventricular node, also in the right atrium, but right at the junction between the atria and ventricle. We have atrioventricular bundle and bundle branches that are located within the interventricular septum. And then in the ventricles, we have Purkinje fibers. So the SA node here is stimulated or stimulates a contraction about every 0.8 seconds. And when it fires, it causes both atria to contract. It also stimulates the AV node. The AV node then sends a signal to the AV bundle and the bundle branches. So here are the bundle branches going out to both ventricles to these Purkinje fibers. The Purkinje fibers are then what actually cause or signal the ventricles to contract. And so the SA node starts the heart rate or heartbeat. And then, like I said, the impulse spreads through the atria to the AV nodes, AV bundle, and bundle branches, and then the ventricles will contract, and that causes blood to be ejected from the heart. Tachycardia is known as a rapid heartbeat, and typically when you are in tachycardia, you have over 100 beats per minute. Bradycardia is a slow heartbeat, and typically this is less than 60 beats a minute. Tachycardia is typically associated with stressful activity like exercise or getting scared, anything that puts you in that sympathetic system. Bradycardia can be because of if your heart is super slow because you're healthy, and so you have a slower heart rate because your muscle can contract so strongly. But it also can be a sign that there's something wrong. Hold on one second. So let's look at what happens during one heartbeat. So one heartbeat is known as a cardiac cycle. This occurs when the atria contract and then the ventricles contract. This occurs typically 75 times per minute. Anywhere between 70 and 80 times a minute is normal. Contraction of the atria or ventricles is known as systole. Relaxation of the ventricles or the atria is known as diastole. Um, and I think I told you already that a cycle typically occurs about every 0.8 seconds. That's when the atria, this SA node, stimulates the atria to contract and then also stimulates that AV node. So in atrial diastole, the ventricles are filling. So you can see the atria are just open. The tricuspid and bicuspid valves are opened. Atria are allowing the blood to flow through. Then, and the semilunar valves are closed. Okay. During atrial systole, then the ventricles are still in a relaxation mode, but the atria push the fluid at a very rapid rate into the ventricles. So the atria basically empty out. This brings us to an isovolumetric contraction. So then, oh, and I should move this. Atria end with their systole and the ventricular systole begins. So now we have interventricular pressure rises, the AV valves are closed, and the semilunar valves are still closed. So now we have this isovolumetric contraction, and then the ventricles are going to release into the blood vessels. The semilunar valves, because the pressure in the blood vessels is lower than the pressure in the ventricles, the semilunar valves open and blood rushes out during ventricular systole. And the atria start to fill again. At this point, we move into an isovolumetric relaxation step, where the ventricles enter the diastole. The pressure falls from the arteries. Semilunar valves are going to close because when the pressure falls in the ventricles below the artery pressure, the blood flows back to the ventricles, and that closes those SL valves. And so again, we have the AV valves closed and the SL valves closed, and this is known as isovolumetric relaxation. And as soon as the blood, is pouring into the atria, that will open those AV valves, and we're in atrial diastole, and then we'll go into atrial systole again. Okay. So when you're listening through a stethoscope to heart sounds, there's always a sound when the AV valves close and a sound when the SL valves close. So that initial AV valve closing is known as that lub sound. Lubbed up, lubbed up. The closing of the SL valves is that dup sound, okay? The faster that is, the faster your heart is beating and the faster blood is flowing. So at this point, you should be able to tell me what the nodal system is, or what the intrinsic conduction system is. You should name the components of the nodal system and how they work, so in order. What serves as the pacemaker of the heart? You should be able to define tachycardia and bradycardia. You should be able to tell me what the cardiac cycle is. You should be able to tell me what systole and diastole is. And you should be able to tell me how many times a heart beats in 1 minute on average for a healthy heart. What makes that lub sound and what makes that dup sound of the heartbeat. The next section we're going to be looking at is how much fluid is pumped out of the heart in 1 minute and what influences that. So the first part, or the first term up here, is cardiac output. That's the amount of blood that is pumped by each ventricle in 1 minute. So amount of blood pumped out into either systemic or pulmonary circulation every minute. The stroke volume is the volume of the blood pumped out. And typical stroke volume is about 70 milliliters of blood pumped with each heartbeat. Our heart rate is then about, on average, between 70 and 80 beats per minute, so 75. So if we take this, we can actually determine how much blood, how many milliliters of blood are pumped in a given minute. Cardiac output equals the heart rate times the stroke volume. So heart rate, again, is 75 beats per minute, average. Stroke volume, 70 milliliters per beat, average. So that gives us about 5,250 milliliters of blood every minute being pumped, or 5.25 liters. And if you remember, we have 4 to 6 liters, about 5 liters of blood in a healthy adult. So that means every minute our blood is being pumped completely. All of our blood goes through our heart and out to our body and back through our heart and out to our body every single minute. This stuff just blows my mind every time I even think about it. I'm just amazed at how amazing our body is. So there's different factors that influence stroke volume. One of the factors that influences stroke volume is the amount of stretch that is put on the cardiac muscle. So if your muscle is stretched more, that's going to cause the cardiac muscle, so cardiac muscle gets stretched, it's going to contract harder. That's going to be influenced by the amount of blood coming back. So think about it. If we have more blood coming back through venous return, that's going to put more pressure on our ventricles, right? And so this is Starling's law of the heart. The more venous return that we have, the more stretched our cardiac muscle is, the stronger the contraction is. If we have less blood coming back, our heart muscle will be stretched less, and we're going to have a less strong contraction. And really, if you have more blood coming back, then you're going to be able to pump more blood out. If you have less blood coming back, you're going to not be able to pump as much blood out. So it makes total sense. So what influences heart rate? I told you that the autonomic nervous system can speed up our heart rate or slow it down, but it does not make our heart beat. The autonomic nervous system does have both sympathetic and parasympathetic fibers that stimulate the heart. And so for parasympathetic, we have the vagus nerve actually stimulates the heart and slows it down, which is what gives us our intrinsic heart rate, which is about 75 beats per minute. If the parasympathetic, or if the vagus nerve was cut, our heart rate would increase to about 100 beats per minute. We have sympathetic nerves as well that increase heart rate. So vagus nerve decreases heart rate. Sympathetic nerves increase heart rate to speed up the rate of blood flow to all of our organs so that we can, again, get through whatever stressful situation we're in. Hormones are going to increase or decrease the heart rate, and the amount of ions in our system are going to increase or decrease depending. So epinephrine and thyroxine speed up the heart rate. If we have too much sodium or too little potassium, that's going to cause more fluid in our heart, which is going to increase the pressure, which would then again increase the heart rate. Physical factors, your age, your gender, the amount of exercise you do, So if you exercise a lot, that increases your heart rate. Body temperature, so if you're super hot, that's going to influence your heart rate. If you're really cold, that also will slow down the heart rate. And so here are some different factors that will influence heart rate. Green increases heart rate, and then pink decreases heart rate. So if you have, say, and any type of stressor, so exercise, um, emotional trauma, any of this, anything that causes stress on the body, that will increase or that will stimulate the nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, and that increases your heart rate. Low blood pressure stimulates the sympathetic nervous system to increase the heart rate. High blood pressure does the opposite. It inhibits sympathetic nervous system. Exercise increases muscle activity, which increases venous return, which increases stroke volume, which increases the heart or the cardiac output, and will also increase eventually the heart rate. Decreased blood volume. So if you're hemorrhaging, that's going to decrease venous return, which decreases stroke volume, which decreases cardiac output. Once a crisis has passed, so say you've exercised and now you're done, then parasympathetic nerves are going to, again, stimulate the heart to slow down, which decreases cardiac output. So at this point, you should be able to tell me what cardiac output is, what stroke volume is, and you should be able to tell me how much, or like how you should be able to determine cardiac output by if I give you heart rate and stroke volume. You should be able to tell me what Starling's law is and how it influences stroke volume, how venous return influences stroke volume, and other factors that influence the heart rate and cardiac output. I'm going to stop here. 17 minutes, that's perfect. And we'll get into our blood vessels, so the roadways of the cardiovascular system, in our next video.